BP's third quarter profits were the highest in 5 years, although you wouldn't necessarily know it from what's happening with the stock. I mean, the stock is basically where it was a year ago. It's up ever so slightly today. Tell me what's going on with BP.
Yeah, you would think, you see oil prices creep back up towards $80 a barrel. You would think that some of these companies with the greatest exposure to oil and natural gas would be keeping pace, but BP not so much. Even though I have said several times I'm industry focused, over the last couple of years, that of the majors, this is the one that I would likely, jump aboard if I was going to invest in an oil major. And I think internally, it's been justified, but the share price still languishing. But they continue to divest some businesses because they still owe money on the Macondo disaster. I think they're going to end up paying about $3 billion this year. We're talking 5-6 years later. And they're going to be selling off more U.S. onshore assets to pay for that. But then they're getting heavier into the shale game. They closed their BHP Billiton purchase for their shale assets, and they expect to be able to pay all cash for that if oil prices remain where they are. Internally, they judge their projects by $60 to $65 a barrel. So right now we're well above that, and it seems 60 to 65 is just that Goldilocks moment, kind of right in the middle of where you might expect it to be. And a lot of projects coming online. So I think that they're in a good place right now. It's just still an oil company, which investors haven't really jumped back on with.
Is that? Well, let me back up. You say that of sort of the behemoths out there, this is the one you find the most interesting from an investor standpoint. Yeah. Why BP and not, say, an Exxon Mobil?
Yeah, I think, with BP, they've been able to they've been forced to kind of streamline. And so whereas Exxon kind of just, it is what it is. It hasn't really been forced to check itself. They've made several big purchases over the years, and some of them have played out, some of them haven't. You have to wait 5 to 10 years to see if some of these actually do. But with BP, they trimmed a lot of the fat to pay off some of these burdens that they've had from the Gulf oil disaster. And now I just like where they're at in terms of upstream assets and more oil focused. And with the project coming on online in the Gulf of Mexico and Australia recently, they don't have the capital expenditures that, say, some Exxon or Chevron have looking forward.
So something happened last week when we were out in Denver for our member event. And when I saw this headline, I immediately thought, I got to get in the studio with Taylor, or I got to get Taylor in the studio to talk about this. And this is the Attorney General from the state of New York filing a lawsuit against Exxon Mobil, alleging that the company defrauded shareholders by downplaying the expected risks of climate change. Yeah. And when that news broke last week, Exxon stock, which had been trading up during the day, immediately started to head south, not in some dramatic way, but it was a pretty noticeable change. And I'm curious what you think of this lawsuit, because in some ways this is completely expected. This is the Attorney General's office in the state of New York has been looking into this matter going back 3 years. Yeah, so filing a lawsuit was going to come at some point. If you're an ExxonMobil shareholder, how worried are you?
I think it's going to be a headache.
I was just going to say, it doesn't go in the plus column.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not something to brush aside. It's going to be a distraction at the very least for management. So it all stems from, in 2015, it came to light that they've kind of been saying things that differed from their internal studies on climate change, saying externally that it's not really that big of a deal. Internally, they discovered that, hey, this really, could be a big thing moving forward, and we need to, as an oil and gas company, at least address it internally. And so saying one thing and knowing another is what started the investigation. And that's still what's coming out with this new case, but it's slightly different because here we're talking about potential securities fraud, misleading investors, not just the general public. And so I think that's kind of scaring folks a little bit, because I guess I'm no legal expert, but folks are saying under the Martin Act, it kind of exposes ExxonMobil to maybe some bigger penalties or a broader array of penalties. And basically, they've used different carbon tax pricing in the public sphere versus what they used internally to kind of justify moving forward with projects. But when you look at it, they used a much higher carbon tax price when they spoke to the public than they did internally. So they made it seem more damaging than they actually thought it would be. And a lot of folks are saying if they had just not even undergone this exercise, which could have been more to the detriment of investors, they would be totally fine just because there wouldn't be that discrepancy in what they've said and what they've internally used. So if they had been less cautious, they'd be fine, and investors could have been punished even more with unknowingly punished. And so I think a headache at the very least, potentially, a few $1 million in fines, $100 million in fines, but it's not going to come out right away. There's going to be complicated math here, and definitely taking it to the courts.
It always makes me smile whenever we just sort of talk about these behemoth companies and say, they'll probably pay $100 million in fines. And it's like,
and then that's it. Yeah.
And then they can.
They kind of tried to do the right thing. They just weren't consistent publicly and internally. And that's what's tripping them up again.
It's always the cover up, people.
Yeah, it is. It's always the cover up.
It's always the cover up. Whether it's your personal life or politics or investing, it's always the cover up that gets you.